This adventure-filled story begins by showing a vast kingdom. This kingdom was ruled by a king who was incredibly powerful. Slowly, he began to build his empire and defeated every neighboring realm. By merging the soldiers of other kingdoms into his own army, his power kept growing. Eventually, a time came when his rule extended over the entire kingdom. In fact, he had almost conquered all the surrounding continents. And that's not all. The king was also highly skilled in combat and had mastered the 5 elements: fire, water, earth, air, and mind. He was extremely proficient in using them all. At that time, there was no one capable of challenging and defeating him. But the king had one major fear: death. He was terrified of dying. He feared that all the powers and skills he had acquired would be lost after his death, and the vast army he had built would fall into someone else's hands. Since he had no sons, he became increasingly conscious about his mortality. Determined not to die anytime soon, the king came up with an idea: if he could somehow become immortal, he could live forever. For this reason, he summoned a group of witches. One of them was the Blue Witch, who was their leader. The king expressed his desire to the Blue Witch. He wanted to become immortal, no matter what. He promised he would give her anything in return. The witch told him that immortality was possible, but the spells required for it were not in her possession. They were written in an ancient book kept far away in a pyramid. Since the king desperately wanted to become immortal, he gave the witch permission to retrieve the book and cast the spell on him as soon as possible. He promised to fulfill anything she asked once he got what he wanted. The king also decided to send a soldier named Ming with the witch to assist her in the journey. So the two of them began their quest to find the book. We also learn that the king had feelings for the Blue Witch. He had never expressed them openly because she belonged to a lower caste, and he feared what people would say if he, a king, formed a relationship with a woman of that status. He decided to keep quiet for now, thinking that once he became immortal, he would confess his love to her. Meanwhile, the king secretly sent another soldier to follow them, as he didn't want anyone else to get close to the Blue Witch. Eventually, Ming and the Blue Witch reached the pyramid and started searching for the book. Throughout the process, Ming helped her immensely, which deeply impressed the witch. It seemed like she had started liking Ming too. After a long search, they finally found the ancient book inside the pyramid, a book that had existed since eternity. But the Blue Witch still hadn't confessed her feelings to Ming. She thought she would do it later. But that spy soldier had noticed everything. He immediately went and informed the king that the Blue Witch seemed to like Ming. The king was furious upon hearing this. However, at that moment, his mind was in an entirely different zone. He was only focused on becoming immortal. For now, he was waiting for Ming and the Blue Witch to return. Within a few hours, the Blue Witch arrived with the ancient book. The king immediately told her to recite the spell that would make him immortal. He said he couldn't wait any longer. The Blue Witch followed all the rituals, opened the book, and recited a spell to make him immortal. As soon as she did, the king began to feel changes inside his body. It felt as though he had become immortal and that no one could ever harm him. Now that he no longer feared death, the king started walking outside with the Blue Witch. But just then, the Blue Witch noticed that the king's soldiers had captured Ming. They were about to punish him. The Blue Witch couldn't understand why the king was doing this. That's when the king revealed the truth: you like Ming, that is his crime. The Blue Witch began pleading with the king to spare Ming, saying that she had truly fallen in love with him. This enraged the king even more. He ordered his soldiers to kill Ming. However, he gave the Blue Witch one final offer: if she agreed to leave Ming and become his queen, he would spare Ming's life. But the Blue Witch refused. She would never make such a choice. Hearing this, the king gave the order, and right in front of the Blue Witch, the soldiers killed Ming. The entire scene was deeply heartbreaking. The king's anger only grew. He couldn't accept why the Blue Witch didn't love him. In his rage, he even stabbed her. Gravely wounded, the Blue Witch picked up the book and prepared to leave. Suddenly, black liquid started flowing from the king's eyes. The liquid kept pouring out, and now the king began to panic. He demanded to know what spell she had cast on him. That's when the Blue Witch revealed the truth: I have cursed you. You and your entire army will turn into clay puppets. Soon, that's exactly what happened. The king and all his soldiers were transformed into lifeless clay figures. His mighty kingdom turned into a deserted ruin, and it faded into history. Years passed. We are now shown a man, a researcher named Eric, who specializes in ancient discoveries. He had a very beautiful wife, and they had a son named Alex. Eric's wife kept asking about their son, worrying when he would return because Alex had gone with a team to explore the pyramid site. Naturally, she was extremely concerned for him. Alex had entered the pyramids with his professor and a research team. He needed to complete his research as soon as possible, because they had reason to believe that some ancient artifacts could be discovered there. His team began exploring the site using advanced technology. Soon, they went deep inside the pyramid and began their research. After a lot of effort, Alex finally found what he had been waiting years to discover: the ancient king's army, which had been turned into clay puppets due to a curse. The entire army was still present there, just as described in many historical legends. Many researchers had dismissed the story of the cursed army as mere myth, but Alex and his team had now proven it true. Upon entering, they were thrilled by their discovery. Alex then began searching for the king. As they went further, they finally saw the king himself, now a clay figure. This proved that all the stories written in history were indeed true. Alex began collecting samples of the figures. But suddenly, he was attacked by a mysterious girl. She wore a mask over her face and tried to ambush Alex stealthily. He defended himself and tried to chase her, but he realized that he needed to secure and patent his discovery first. So, he began gathering all the artifacts to take back with him. After all, it was his discovery, one that might soon become incredibly famous. On the other side, we see Alex's father Eric and his wife meeting with an agent. This man worked for a secret organization and had come to Eric with a very important mission. The agent placed a highly valuable item in front of them, an ancient and rare egg that the people of China deeply worshipped. It was tied to their religious beliefs. The agent and his organization wanted Eric and his wife to safely deliver this egg to its destination in China by Sunday. They needed to hand it over to some very important people. But there were also many dangerous people after the egg. So now, Eric and his wife were given the responsibility of transporting it safely. Having accepted the mission, they set off toward their destination. They arrived at a grand party attended by many businessmen who invested in research projects. Eric's wife was quite happy because her brother was also present at the party. The shocking twist came when Alex also arrived at the party after his discovery, and we learned that Alex did not want to live with his parents anymore. The truth was that Alex's parents never gave him much time or attention. He had spent most of his life alone, and that's why, now that he was grown up, he no longer wanted to live with them. His parents were always busy with their work. Even now, Eric and his wife tried to talk to Alex, but he kept ignoring them and enjoyed himself with his team instead. This behavior started making Eric angry. But then his wife tried to make him understand, saying, "We've achieved so much in life. We discovered ancient artifacts and made our name in history. But our only son has grown distant from us. There can be no greater failure in life than this. We've succeeded in our careers but failed in building a family." These words struck a chord with Eric. Deep inside, he realized it was true. He began trying to communicate more with his son, hoping to erase the resentment in his heart. Soon, Alex came to show his parents his discovery. He had brought with him the statue of the ancient king, the same cursed ruler turned into a clay puppet. Eric and his wife were stunned to see it. Their son had achieved something truly monumental. This was the same ancient king who once ruled a vast empire. Seeing this statue would make more people believe that the stories from history were real. Alex felt proud, not just because of the historical importance, but because this could bring him a lot of money. The statue would likely be treated as a national treasure. A little while later, after Alex left, his professor arrived and met Eric and his wife. The professor praised Alex greatly. But then, almost immediately, he turned to Eric and said, "You have something that belongs to me, something you must deliver." Eric and his wife understood right away that he was referring to the ancient egg. So Eric quickly brought it out and handed it to the professor, warning him, "Please carry this with extreme care. It is incredibly precious." Eric and his wife trusted the professor. But that's where they made a huge mistake. The professor was deceiving them all. He had betrayed everyone, all because a military general had instructed him to steal the egg by any means necessary. In return, the general had promised the professor a large sum of money. And just like that, the ancient egg slipped out of their hands. Now the general himself arrived at the site with his team. Eric and his wife realized instantly that the egg had fallen into the wrong hands, and that retrieving it was now critical. The general now held the ancient egg in his hands. Eric's wife kept insisting, "This egg is extremely precious. It must be delivered to its rightful guardians, otherwise, something terrible could happen." But the general had something else in mind. He intended to use the egg to resurrect the ancient king and his army, who had once ruled the world and were cursed into clay. With the help of the ancient egg, the general believed that he could rule over the entire kingdom. With that intention, he opened the egg. Eric and his wife were restrained by the others so they couldn't do anything to stop it. Inside the egg was a sacred water, a holy liquid that could break the curse trapping the ancient king and his army. The general immediately poured the water straight onto the king's clay statue. And at that very moment, the curse shattered. The king, who had been trapped in the earth for centuries, came back to life. His entire body began to ignite, a result of being buried in soil for so long. His body had become mummified, but the powers he once possessed during ancient times were still intact. At that moment, he was the most powerful being alive. When the resurrected king learned that the general had helped him return, he spared the general. But he became furious with the professor. As the professor tried to run, the king delivered a powerful punch that shattered the professor's body completely. The king then made the general ride with him on his mount and began to leave. Alex, who witnessed all this with his own eyes, was terrified. He realized immediately that now that the king was back, he would definitely try to revive his army too. And if that happened, he could destroy everything in his path to reclaim his empire. Alex knew how cruel the king was. He would do anything for his own gain. So Alex made every effort to stop the king and his followers, even though it meant putting his own life in danger. Suddenly, the same girl who had attacked Alex earlier inside the pyramid showed up again. But this time, for some reason, she helped Alex instead. Her name was Lynn, and now she had joined Alex in fighting against the king. But the king and the general proved to be much more cunning. While traveling on their mount, they separated one half of the ride, causing Alex and Lynn to be thrown far away from them. The king and the general escaped once again. Now Lynn explained everything to Alex. She said, "We must stop that emperor. If he finds a way to revive his army, he will bring destruction everywhere." She then revealed that she had a special weapon that could kill the king, a dagger imbued with a curse. However, their immediate priority was to prevent the king from reaching the mountain range. Lynn explained everything to Alex's mom and dad, that they had to stop the king from reaching the sacred waters again. That was the same water he used to resurrect himself, and now he would try to sprinkle it on his army to bring them back as well. Everyone understood Lynn's plan. Without wasting any more time, they set off toward the mountains. Alex, Lynn, and the others finally reached the mountain range. Now they just had to locate the temple where the sacred water was kept. They had to protect it at all costs. Lynn immediately raised her voice and summoned massive creatures to the scene. These creatures were her allies who would help in the battle ahead. But they soon realized that the king and the general had already reached the location as well, searching for the sacred water. As soon as the general spotted Alex, Lynn, and the others, he ordered his forces to attack them. Gunfire erupted from all sides, forcing Alex and his group to retreat. They were clearly outnumbered and couldn't fight back directly. So Lynn called upon her white demons, who arrived just in time and began attacking the general's forces. The demons fought fiercely to take them down. During the battle, Alex's father, Eric, got injured. Someone had struck him, and he was now bleeding heavily. Alex screamed and called for help for his father. Seeing all this, Lynn quickly led everyone to safety through a hidden mountain passage. They kept moving deeper into the mountains until they finally reached the temple, the place where the sacred water was kept. The shocking twist? The Blue Witch herself was already there, the same one who had cursed the king and turned him into a puppet centuries ago. And not only that, we now learn that Lynn is the daughter of the Blue Witch. Both of them had consumed the sacred water long ago, which is why they were still alive. In other words, they were both immortal. Using her powers, the Blue Witch healed Eric's wounds. Watching all of this, it started to seem like Alex had fallen in love with Lynn. But Lynn kept thinking to herself, Alex will grow old, and I never will. This can't work. But the very thing they feared soon happened. The ancient king found the hidden temple. With the general's help, he reached the temple and began killing anyone in his path. The king was desperate to get to the sacred water. He immediately removed his armor and began consuming the holy liquid. The water granted him immense powers, so much that multiple versions of the king appeared, and he transformed into a terrifying dragon capable of defeating the largest of armies. Everyone present was frozen in fear. No one dared fight him. Now in dragon form, the king stole the cursed dagger, the only weapon that could kill him. Then the dragon kidnapped Lynn, the daughter of the Blue Witch, and flew away from the temple. Using the sacred water, the king resurrected his entire ancient army, millions of warriors who had been mummified with him centuries ago. Armies buried deep beneath Egypt began to rise under his command. It was clear that an apocalypse was near. The king began guiding his army on how to invade all the continents and reclaim his empire. Devastation was inevitable. The Blue Witch, aware of the king's intentions, urgently informed everyone of the danger. She commanded them all, retrieve the cursed dagger, no matter what. If the cursed dagger could be recovered, it would be the only way to kill the king. But first, they had to stop the king's million-strong army. So the Blue Witch used her powers to resurrect the good soldiers from the past, including Ming and his companions, who had died long ago. Once revived, they headed straight into battle against the king's dark army. The battlefield was now swarming with soldiers on both sides, all locked in intense combat. Meanwhile, Alex reached the king's stronghold and tried to rescue Lin. On the other side, the Blue Witch confronted the king directly and engaged in a fierce battle with him. Though powerful, the king was stronger. The Blue Witch had only one goal: to retrieve the dagger. The king hurled her away with great force, injuring her badly. But despite the pain, she managed to grab the dagger. She handed it over to Eric, Alex's father, and his mother, telling them that the only way to defeat the king was to use that dagger. Now that the dagger was out of his hands, the king grew more cautious, because even though he was immortal, the cursed dagger could kill him. The Blue Witch clearly explained, "You must strike the king directly in the heart with this dagger. Only then will his immortality be destroyed, and he will perish." Eric showed great bravery and charged toward the king with the dagger. He challenged the king to battle. But the king transformed once again, into a monstrous beast, and began attacking. Eric struck the king multiple times, but he knew that the critical blow had to be to the heart. Thanks to the dagger's cursed power, the king began to weaken. And in a perfect moment, Eric drove the dagger straight into the king's chest. The king's immortality shattered instantly. His entire body burst into flames and exploded, disintegrating completely. At the same time, Lin and Alex fought off the remaining enemies and escaped. With the king's death, his entire army also turned to dust, as their lives were bound to his curse. The battlefield fell silent. Ming and his once-dead comrades rejoiced. They had chosen the path of righteousness and emerged victorious. It even seemed that Ming still loved the Blue Witch after all these years. Now that everything had returned to normal, Lin danced with Alex, and his parents celebrated joyfully. Their once broken family had now come together again. And so, our story ends here.